It began as all nights do. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in bruises of purple and orange. Then she arrived, the moon, a familiar friend in the dark canvas above. She rose with a silent grace, a perfect polished pearl against black velvet. People on their porches watched her climb the sky, her light a gentle comfort. Lovers held hands under her silver gaze, their faces bathed in her soft glow. Children in their beds dreamt of her, a silent guardian in their slumber. She was a constant, a reliable anchor in the vast, unknowable cosmos. The world felt safe under her watchful, silent light. But tonight something was different. It was a subtle shift, a change so small that most people missed it. The light she cast seemed heavier. It was not the usual ethereal silver. Instead, it had a milky, almost sickly quality to it. The shadows it threw were deeper, longer, and seemed to squirm at the edges of vision. Dogs began to whine softly in their yards, their noses pointed toward the sky, sensing a wrongness that their masters could not yet comprehend. Tides behaved erratically, pulling and pushing with an unnatural, jarring rhythm that confused old sailors and seasoned fishermen alike. The familiar comfort was slowly, almost imperceptibly, turning into a quiet, creeping dread. On a quiet suburban street, a young girl named Elara looked through her telescope. She did this every night. It was her ritual, her connection to the universe. She knew the moon's face better than her own. She knew every crater, every sea, every shadow. But tonight, the familiar landscape seemed to pulse. A faint, rhythmic thrumming vibrated through the lens of her telescope, a deep, slow heartbeat from the cold, dead rock. She pulled away, her own heart starting to race. The moon was not supposed to have a pulse. It was silent. It was still. But tonight, it felt alive. Around the globe, others began to notice. An astronomer in a remote observatory in Chile saw the seismic readings from the lunar surface spike. The data made no sense. It looked like the readings from a living, breathing creature, not a dormant satellite of rock and dust. In Tokyo, a live feed of the moon on a massive downtown screen flickered. For a split second, a dark line like a closed eyelid seemed to appear across its center. It was gone before anyone could be sure they saw it, dismissed as a technical glitch. But the seed of unease had been planted in millions of minds. The moon, our constant companion, was no longer behaving as it should. The unease grew into a quiet, global panic. News channels started running segments with astronomers who offered nervous, unconvincing explanations. They spoke of solar flares and atmospheric distortions. They used complex words to mask their own confusion and growing fear. But the people knew. They could feel it in their bones. The moon was not just distorted by our atmosphere, it was changing itself. The milky glow intensified, casting the world in a perpetual, dreamlike twilight. Sleep became difficult for many, their nights filled with strange, formless nightmares of a great eye watching them from the void of space. The world held its breath, waiting. The changes became more obvious, more undeniable. The craters on the lunar surface began to shift. Their edges softened, blending into the surrounding plains as if the rock itself were becoming flesh. The dark seas, the Maria, swirled with new patterns like ink spreading in water. It was a slow, horrifying transformation. It was like watching a statue slowly begin to breathe. The lines and scars that had defined the man in the moon for millennia were smoothing out, melting into something new, something organic and utterly alien. The moon was healing its old wounds, preparing for something. Elara stayed glued to her telescope, her schoolwork and friends forgotten. She documented everything in a small notebook, her hands trembling as she sketched the impossible changes. She saw what looked like veins spreading across the lunar surface, dark branching lines that pulsed with a faint, dark light. They spread from a central point, a long, dark fissure that was slowly widening across the moon's equator. It was no longer a crack. It was a seam. It was the line where two halves of a whole were preparing to part, like a shell getting ready to open. She knew what was coming. She felt it with a certainty that terrified her. The fissure widened. It stretched from one limb of the moon to the other, a grotesque smile in the sky. A low hum, once only detectable by sensitive instruments, could now be heard by the naked ear. It was a deep, resonant sound that vibrated in the chest, a celestial groan of something immense stirring from an eon-long slumber. People gathered in the streets, their faces turned upward, a mixture of awe and absolute terror in their eyes. The scientific explanations had stopped. There was no explanation for this. There was only the terrible unfolding reality. The moon was breaking. It was opening. Then, it happened. The fissure, that dark, smiling line, began to part. It moved with a slowness that was agonizing, a cosmic spectacle of horror. There was no sound of cracking rock, only that deep, gut-wrenching hum that grew louder and louder. The two halves of the moon's surface pulled away from each other like colossal eyelids. What was revealed underneath was not rock or magma. It was something wet, something organic, something that glistened in the cold light of the distant stars. A great spherical surface was unveiled, dark and impossibly deep. Humanity watched, paralyzed, as the moon opened its eye. It was an eye larger than any mountain, wider than any ocean. The iris was a swirling nebula of cosmic dust and gas, colors that humanity had no names for. It was beautiful, and it was monstrous. At its center was the pupil, a void, an abyss of perfect, absolute blackness that seemed to drink the light of the stars around it. It was not looking at anything in particular. It was simply open, aware. The light it cast upon the earth was no longer the gentle silver of old. It was the cold, analytical light of a predator's gaze, a light that stripped away all warmth and all hope. Chaos erupted on the ground. The sight was too much for the human mind to bear. People screamed in the streets, running without direction, their sanity shattering like glass. Cars crashed as drivers stared, mesmerized at the horror in the sky. Religions collapsed in an instant. Prayers went unanswered, or perhaps they were answered by this new, terrible God that had been hiding in plain sight all along. All the myths, all the legends of monsters and titans were but children's stories compared to this. This was the truth. We were not alone. We were being watched. Ilara stood by her window, her telescope forgotten on the floor. She was not screaming, she was not running, she was simply watching, tears streaming down her face. She saw the eyes slowly, deliberately begin to focus. The swirling iris constricted, the pupil sharpened. It was no longer just looking out into the void, it was looking down. It was looking at the small blue marble suspended in the darkness. It was looking at the scurrying creatures on the surface. It was looking at her. The great cosmic eye, the eye that was once our moon, had found its focus. It was looking at us. The world fell into a new kind of silence. After the initial wave of panic and screaming, a profound, chilling stillness took hold. The eye did not blink. It did not move. It simply stared. Its gaze was a physical weight, a pressure that settled over the entire planet. All of humanity was trapped beneath that unblinking stare. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Even indoors, in the deepest basements, people could feel it. They could feel the cold, ancient consciousness behind that eye, studying them, observing them with an intelligence so vast and old, it was utterly incomprehensible. Time seemed to lose its meaning. The sun still rose and set, but its light felt weak and insignificant. The day was just a brief interruption of the true reality, the night. And the night belonged to the eye. People stopped going to work. Society as it was known crumbled not with a bang, but with a quiet, terrified whimper. What was the point of commerce, of art, of love, when you were nothing more than a specimen under a cosmic microscope? The moon, our former beacon of light and romance, had become our eternal warden, our silent, ever-present judge. The gaze was not malevolent, it was not angry, it was something far worse. It was curious, it was the look of a scientist studying a colony of ants. There was no malice, but there was also no empathy. Humanity was an interesting phenomenon, a fleeting curiosity to be observed before it was perhaps dissected, or simply wiped away with a thought. The fear was not of a sudden, fiery annihilation. The fear was of the unknown intention behind that colossal, patient stare. We were subject to the whims of a being that had used a celestial body as its shell, and so humanity waited. Elara, like everyone else, learned to live with the eye in the sky. She learned to eat, to drink, to exist under its constant, unwavering scrutiny. The horror did not fade. It simply became a part of life, a permanent feature of the world, like the sky itself. Humanity had spent its entire existence looking up at the moon, wondering about the universe. We had searched for signs of life, for meaning in the cosmos. Now we knew. The universe was not empty, it was aware, and its gaze had finally fallen upon us. The long, silent watch had begun, and we had no idea when or how it would end.